Shalom. First and foremost, call Halal Yamala, Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem HaRachak Wadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone that I learned this truth from. And also peace and salutations to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And pretty much the title of this video is going to be, Don't Let the Hustle and Bustle of Babylon Make You Unfruitful. All right, don't let the hustle and bustle of Babylon, okay, Babylon the Great, which is America, make you unfruitful, okay, because of course, many of us, Akim and Aquathium, all right, but especially, those of us Akim, that are, especially those of us that are on the front lines, preaching the gospel, doing these videos and these lessons, going out on the highways and the hedges, week in and week out, doing the work of the Lord, preaching the gospel, singing a new song, okay, waking up the Lord's sheep, his elect, all right. Of course, throughout the week and throughout our daily lives, we have responsibilities, we have things that we have to, do, things that we have to do to make ends meet, right? Our jobs or, careers or, whatever we do for a living, to keep our bills paid and to keep a roof over our house, all right, clothes on our back, food in our stomach, and to be able to take care of our families and things like that. A lot of those things to do all those things takes a lot of hustle and bustle throughout the day and throughout the week. And a lot of times doing these things, it drains our energy, right? And of course, we know this is all due to the curses, having to work jobs and having to, do this, that, and third throughout the day and throughout the week. That we know that all goes back to the curses back in Deuteronomy 28. That we would have to serve our enemies, Esau, Edom, and these heathen nations, for hunger, thirst, nakedness, and then one of all things, right? We serve these heathen via jobs and, and whatnot. And a lot of these things take, a lot of time out of our day. It takes a lot of energy out of us. All right. But still in all, for many of us, brothers, or especially that's on the front lines, you may work jobs where you're working 9 hours out of the day, 10 hours of the day, 11 hours of the day, 12 hours. Some brothers even, having jobs working even more hours than that throughout the day. You see that? But still in all, okay, even as Yahushua said in Matthew the 6th chapter, still in all with these, jobs and responsibilities that we have in this world, okay, Yahushua still commanded us to do this. In Matthew 6 and verse 33, he says, "But seek ye first the kingdom of Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, the kingdom of heaven, and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." See that? So despite, whatever responsibilities and, priorities and things that we have to do throughout the day and throughout the week, we're still commanded by Yahweh to still seek the kingdom of heaven first, first and foremost. That's the main thing that we're always commanded to prioritize, okay, each and every day when we wake up. The kingdom, okay, this truth, this gospel, this ministry, right? Having our minds, focus more so on the work of Yahweh Shai than the work of Esau, these heathen, right, along with the Lord's righteousness. You see that? And as Yahushua is even speaking of right here in this verse, when we seek the kingdom of Yahweh Shai, this truth, this gospel, this ministry, okay, then Yahweh Shai is going to add all things that we need, okay, to get by in this world unto us, when we put Yahweh Shai first. You see that? But if you find yourself in a position where, okay, you working a job, right? But you're working long hours throughout the day and throughout the week to the point to where you start to feel like that job is kind of like weighing down more in your mind than the truth and this ministry and things like that. Then hey, that you got to take time, to the best of your ability, take time out of your day, okay, to tend to, to Yahweh Shema Shai and His truth. Even if it just, maybe 30 minutes, a half an hour a day, still, take, always seek to take some time out of your day to, pray to Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, study, read, all right, Slakia. Watch videos, okay, or do a video yourself. Whatever your situation may be, okay. But despite all the time and energy that we spend, each and every day on these jobs and things like that, the hustle and bustle of Babylon, different responsibilities that we have in this world. Okay, always seek to to prioritize Yahweh Shema Shai first and foremost. Okay, so like, as a matter of fact, let me get this in the book of Matthew. Because we already know, pursuant to Daniel 7, okay, that the little horn of the fourth beast system, okay, the revival of Rome, which is Babylon the Great America, as we know, as it speaks of in Daniel 7 and around about the 25th verse, that this little horn America, Babylon the Great, would wear out the saints. Okay, and of course, who are the saints? The Israelites, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. And what's since Esau Edom came to the side of the world, all right. What's of course been one of the main ways that Esau Edom has worn down our people through servitude, slavery. Okay, constantly working us to death. Keeping our minds busy and preoccupied with the work of Esau Edom. Okay, and not giving us time to focus our mind and attention on, all right, Yahweh Shema Shai, our power, right? And the way that Esau is constantly trying to wear us down more and more and more. Okay, as Yahushua spoke of in the parable of the sower here in Matthew 13, and I'll just go straight down, just for time's sake, as Yahushua speaks of right here in Matthew 13 and verse 22. He says, "He also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches." Okay, the cares of this world, different things in this world that try to jerk you away from your Yahweh Shema Shai and try to jerk you away from the truth. Okay, along with the deceitfulness of riches, opportunities to make all kinds of money. All right, opportunities to make all kinds of money, to where you end up turning your back against Yahweh Shema Shai. Right? It says these things choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. Okay, if you get caught up in the hustle and bustle of Babylon the Great, in the hustle and bustle of this world, to where you're pretty much prioritizing the things of this world and the cares of this world over Yahweh Shema Shai, then as Yahweh spoke of right here, is going to choke the word out of you. All right, and of course, anytime you choke something out, if you choke animal out, or if you choke a person out, what does that do? You pretty much take the breath out of them. You squeeze the breath out of them. You see that? So if you allow yourself to be caught up in a hustle and bustle and the cares of this world, okay, this world is going to squeeze the breath of life out of you, this truth, okay, and it's going to therefore what? Make you unfruitful. All right, and let's look up this word unfruitful. All right, this word unfruitful.
Strong's G 175, akarpas. Akarpas.
All right, and it means metaphorically without fruit, barren, not yielding what it ought to yield. Okay? And what is Yahweh Shema Shai through the scriptures and through the spirit requires each and every one of us except the hopeful elect to yield. Fruits of the spirit, our works to show our faith. You see that? And so on and so forth. Making our bodies a living sacrifice, working out our salvation with fear and trembling. You see that? Because otherwise, hey, if we allow this world to choke this word out of us, then therefore what? We'll become unfruitful. We'll start to no longer show, all right, and do the things that Yahweh Shema Shah requires of us. We'll become barren. You see that? And mind you, fruit. What is fruit meant to do? Is meant to grow. Bear seeds to continue reproducing, right? And that's how we, the hopeful elect, are pretty much through the spirit. We're likened to fruits. Fruits of Yahweh Shema Shai through the spirit, through the fruits of the spirit, right? Constantly reproducing good works. Okay, constantly building up the rest of the elect. Okay, to become precious fruit in the eyes of Yahweh Shema Shai. So therefore, if you allow the cares and the different hustle things of this world, the hustle and bustle of this world, to pretty much get you caught up. Okay, this world is gonna choke the word and the spirit out of you, and therefore make you unfruitful. And if you're unfruitful to Yahweh Shema Shai, then therefore what? You're gonna be pretty much be considered unprofitable. All right, a liability. You see that? And want to go here real quick. This is the book of Sirach, chapter 38, and verse 24, and this is in the GNT. It says, scholars must have time to study if they are going to be wise. They must be relieved of other responsibilities. And you see, Esau, Edom, the way that Esau has, a lot of these different jobs set up, having you work long hours, 40 hours out of the week, 50 hours out of the week, okay, 60 hours out of the week, working 9 hours a day, 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours. Okay, you best believe Esau, Edom, and his elites, all right, and these CEOs of these big time companies and whatnot, you best believe that they do these things all by design. Keeping the people distracted, working long hours out of the day, not having a whole bunch of leisure time, outside of work and things like that. You best believe this is all being done. This is all done systematically and by design. Because mind you, not to mention, you had one of the elites of Esau Edom. I always forget who it is, but pretty much one of the elites of Esau Edom has a quote that you can look up throughout the internet. Okay, as a matter of fact, let's look it up. Yeah, Nation of Workers quotes. Let's see. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay, so this is a quote by John D. Rockefeller. All right, and if you know anything about the Rockefellers, okay, they're tied to the Red Shield family. You see that? The Red Shield family. Okay, so the Rockefellers, which is an elite banking family of Esau Edom. All right, and mind you as well, the Rockefellers, when you look it up as well, they were the banking family of Esau Edom who were behind the feminist movement. You see that? To take women out of the household, take women from their roles and put women into the workplace. Okay, all for the purpose of what? Collecting, twice as much taxes. Now that you have the man and the woman out of the house and working, right? That allows the government, okay, and the elites of Esau Edom to collect, double the amount of tax dollars, right? And at the same time, while the man and the woman is out of the house working, okay, that leaves the man and the woman no choice but to do what with the children, sending children to school to be indoctrinated by Esau's false education, his lies, his philosophies, right, and be raised up via the school system into full blown anti Messiah, anti Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay, but as this quote says, all right, it says the phrase "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers" is widely attributed to industrialist, all right, industrialist John D. Rockefeller. It is frequently cited in discussions regarding the history of the American education system and the industrial era. Okay, and you could pretty much read more on it on your own. But yeah, see the elites of Esau Edom, they purposely designed, the workforce and whatnot to have people working, 9 hours out of the day, 10 hours of the day, 11 hours, 12 hours, even more hours than that throughout the day. Because what? They don't want a nation of people who know how to think, who know how to use, critical thinking system, who knows how to ask questions and, peep things out. Okay? And what's one of the ways that Esau Edom has prevented a nation of thinkers and people who know how to ask questions and, think critically, by just having people working all day, keeping people's minds preoccupied and distracted from the wickedness that the elites of Esau Edom and those that rub elbows with them are doing, okay, with their tax dollars. You see that? Because these elites, they have all the time in the world throughout the day. You average everyday people don't, okay, and especially the Israelites. You see that? And even even us, the hopeful elect, those of us that are on the front lines. Okay, you have days where you working so many hours throughout the day that you don't have time to really study and catch up on videos or do videos like that. Okay, and it just speaks to, again, quoting from Daniel 7, Esau Edom via this little horn to revive the fourth beast, ancient Rome. All right, Babylon the Great. Okay, this is all another major tactic of Esau wearing out the saints. You see that? And so as it goes into right here in Sirach 38 and 24 in the GNT, it says scholars must have time to study if they are going to be wise. They must be relieved from other duties. And of course, we know, just because we have this truth and we know this truth, and of course, we go out and teach this truth on the highways and hedges. That doesn't mean that we have to, we should just quit our jobs and you know discontinue doing whatever we may be doing to make a living and pay our bills and keep a roof over our head. Okay, no, because again, going back to the curse in Deuteronomy 28, is written that we must serve our enemies for food and water and clothing and housing and the things that we need, okay, to sustain ourselves in this world. All right, but yet, despite the things that we have going on in this world, right, we still have to take time to study as it's going into, take time to tap into the spirit, pray, okay, watch videos or do videos, fast, whatever whatever you got to do to keep yourself in the spirit, and keep yourself connected with Yahweh Shema Shai, especially in these times that we're in. Okay, but as it says again, Sirach 38 and 24, scholars must have time to study if they are going to be wise. They must be relieved of other responsibilities. Verse 25, how can a farmhand gain knowledge when his only ambition is to drive the oxen and make them work, when all he knows to talk about is livestock? Okay, he takes great pains to plow a straight furrow and will work far into the night to feed the animals. Okay, but yeah, pretty much as it's going into, how could a person that's just constantly preoccupied with work, labor, right? How could a person that's constantly preoccupied with all these things pretty much gain wisdom? A person who hardly has leisure time to study, sit back and meditate on things, tap in the spirit. How can a person in this situation, grow in the spirit, or grow in wisdom, or grow in knowledge? You see that? And so, and that's why, even though, those of us Akim, especially those of us that's teaching and on the front lines, even though, yes, we have these jobs and we have these responsibilities and these things that we have to tend to in this world, to sustain ourselves and make ends meet. But still, all in all, seek the kingdom of Yahweh Shema Shah first and foremost, and His righteousness. Find ways to feed your spirit. Okay, find ways to tap into the scriptures and tap into the spirit to continue growing in the spirit, growing in faith, growing in wisdom. Okay, growing in all the things that we're gonna need through the spirit to endure through these times, especially when these jobs are getting ready to be wiped out. Okay, food is getting ready to be wiped out. All right, perplexity, and we're gonna have to step out on faith to Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, more than ever. You see that? The time to build up to these things is now. Okay, even though we have all these things going on in the world before us, hey, we still have this truth to tend to. You see that? And when it's all said and done, we can't use the excuse to Yahweh Shai, saying, oh, my job and this, that, and the third. I didn't have time for this, I didn't have time for that. No. Okay? Regardless of our situation, we have to make time, okay, to Yahweh Shema Shai. Even if it's just 30 minutes out of your day. Hey, do it. And do it to the best of your ability. And do it sincerely. Okay? Hey, if you can make, 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours out of your day to tend to Esau's work, okay, then why wouldn't you have at least 30 minutes to an hour of your day to tend to Yahweh Shema Shai's work? You see that? But hey, when it's all said and done, just hey, do what you gotta do to get right with Yahweh Shema Shai to the best of your ability, to the best of your ability, to the best of your ability, Salakia, to the best of your situation. Pray, fast, study, do your lessons, okay, and continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. You see that? Because when it's all said and done, when all these jobs and all these things that's going on in this world, all the hustle and bustle is taken away, hey, we're still gonna have this truth, okay? We're still gonna have the kingdom to look forward to. You see that? So yeah, so I just wanted to go into that in this particular lesson. So Lord willing, this video was edifying. And until next time, shalom.